Hey there, welcome to the Energy Blueprint Podcast. I'm your host, Ari Whitten, and today I have with me a very special guest, someone who I've been excited to interview for a very long time, and it is Dr. Mary Clifton, who is a widely recognized CBD and cannabinoid THC expert, this whole topic. So I'm going to read her official bio here. She is a board-certified MD practicing in Manhattan. She's a recognized expert in CBD and cannabis and the host of the CBD Health Revolution, which there's going to be a link to on this podcast page, which is going to be at theenergyblueprint.com/CBD. And you can opt into this new CBD-focused health summit right there. It's free access, so just wanted to quickly mention that. So she's the host of the CBD Health Revolution and the highly respected professional certification course, the Cannabinoid Protocol. She's worked with several pharmaceutical CBD and cannabis, I'm getting it mixed up with cannabinoid, cannabis corporations on product development, and has provided medical and scientific directorship in the US, Europe, Asia, and Africa. I almost said dictatorship there. That wouldn't have been good. That wouldn't have been a good slip up at all.
I think I'd be benevolent in a dictator role, though.
You would. I was going to tell you right before we started recording, you have a very soothing voice. So I can't imagine you being a harsh dictator.
No.
So she's also the best-selling author of The Grass is Greener, Medical Marijuana, THC, and CBD Oil, Reversing Chronic Pain, Inflammation, and Disease, and Get Wasted. That's WAISTED. As well as 5 companion cookbooks. She speaks at major cannabinoid events around the world, including Africa, Europe, and Asia. So welcome, Dr. Clifton. Such a pleasure to finally have you. I know this has been a long time in the making, so I'm glad we're finally making it happen.
I am so glad too. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. You have such a marvelous audience. And I always love when an audience is really engaged, very educated and elevated already. And then I can dig really deep. So, I'm excited to talk to a group of people that want to know the details.
Yes, absolutely. I'm sure there's a lot of avenues we can take within your range of specialties here, and I'm sure that you could do 5 hours of discussion just on CBD or just on marijuana. I want to focus probably more on CBD, though I'm totally fine if you want to inject anything on marijuana throughout this discussion. First of all, for people who haven't heard of it, and I can't imagine that all this applies to a lot of people at this point because CBD has kind of exploded in popularity and so many people are talking about it. And I think I think you'd agree with me, there's probably a lot of people talking about it in an unrealistic sort of panacea cure-all sort of way. And there's a lot of pseudoscience out there. So I'm looking forward to actually interviewing a real expert on the subject who can maybe speak to the actual evidence and maybe we can debunk some of the myths along the way or areas where there isn't good science to support some claims. But first of all, to start, what is CBD for people who haven't heard of it or maybe heard of it, but they don't really know what it is?
Yeah, and I agree with you on the research. We don't have multi-million-dollar research that was done in multiple different places that we can draw on for really any of the conditions that cannabinoid formulations may work on. And we have to rely on some very elegant but small studies that give us a better idea of how it's working. So I have all of my favorites, outlined for our talk today. But CBD is just a distillation product from a cannabis or hemp plant. Some hemp plants, cannabis plants, are designed to grow up with a very high concentration of THC. And you can recognize those if you look at the flowers of the plants. They'll have a lot of crystals all over the flowers of the plants. They'll have sort of like a whitish, if you will, like a little froth or frosting on the buds. And that's a very high THC concentration on that plant. But plants that grow more hemp will have flowers that are concentrated in hemp, and they just look like a green flower, like the kind of flowers you see in Christmas decorations or in like fall, really beautiful fall bouquets. And then drug companies or different CBD companies can work to distill that as much as you like. They can just get the CBD product directly from the plant with all of the other plant chemicals and any other CBG or CBN, any other cannabinoids that might be in the plant. And they can give you that product, which is considered full spectrum or broad spectrum CBD products. Or they can take that CBD product and usually work with an alcohol distillation and distill off the CBD isolate so that it's pure. There's nothing else in the isolate but the CBD. And then you can, some people prefer a very pure isolate when they want to see if something's working, and other people prefer more of a whole foods approach to their treatments. And so that really differentiates those two. There's also a small risk that if you use the CBD that is a broad spectrum, it could have a very small amount of THC in there, up to 0.3%. So if there's any problem with you getting any exposure to THC, those broad spectrum or full spectrum hemp-derived CBDs just need to be, considered a little bit differently.
Gotcha.
But the CBD, CBN, CBG, THC are all cannabinoids that live and grow within the hemp or cannabis plant. And the CBD is just the workhorse out of that crowd. As much as we know about CBD, although we're gaining more knowledge on all of the other cannabinoids, but CBD appears to be the leader for the anti-inflammatory work, for work in helping to control pain and help people relax from anxiety and insomnia.
Gotcha. Well, I definitely, I know you're cutting off the list there very quickly. So I want to get into that very long list of benefits and potential benefits of CBD. First, I would like to kind of ground this whole discussion in maybe the broader context of the endocannabinoid system.
Yes,
So
please do.
can you speak to what the endocannabinoid system is? And I think there's a lot of people out there who have heard of CBD at this point, and certainly everyone knows of what marijuana is. Um, but not a lot of people know what the endocannabinoid system is. So can you speak to what that system is and what kind of physiological roles it has?
Sure. I mean, well, we really didn't know as doctors or health providers or scientists what the endocannabinoid system was until the late 80s or early 90s when we finally started to study cannabis, when people who were suffering from cancer or who were dying from HIV/AIDS at the time were saying that they were getting such great relief of their symptoms with those products. So scientists started to look at it, and we find this amazing endocannabinoid system that is located literally on every organ and tissue in your body. The endocannabinoid system overlays the rest of your systems in a similar way to the adrenal and cortisol axis, where if your cortisol is low or high, your entire body responds to that shift. Or your thyroid, where if your thyroid is thrown off, every organ in your body has a response to that. The endocannabinoid system is very similar. It's on all of our tissues and all of our organs, primarily CB1 and CB2 receptors, although now scientists are finding CB3, CB4, CB5 receptors in various isolated parts in the brain. But the CB1 receptors are located primarily in the nervous system and in our spinal cord and our brains and in the nerves that exit out to our arms and legs. And the CB2 receptors are located primarily in muscles and other organs, and also very predominantly in the immune system. So there's this very far-reaching functionality that's already in your body. And your body is actually already making endocannabinoids, which are referred to as 2-AG and anandamide. Those are the endocannabinoids that your body makes naturally from the fats in your diet. And those endocannabinoids are there already to stimulate CB1 and CB2 receptors throughout your system. So, for example, if you take a biopsy, if you take a sample of someone's inflamed colon and study that inflamed colon compared to normal, there's a higher concentration of CB receptors in the lining of the colon and also in the smooth muscle that surrounds that area of the colon, in that area of inflammation. And the same thing if you have a rheumatoid arthritis joint that's swollen with rheumatoid fluid and you pull that joint fluid off, that fluid has a higher concentration of 2-AG and anandamide. your body is already setting up an anti-inflammatory, trying to reduce the pain, trying to restore homeostasis in these areas that are injured. So your body is already priming this system so that if you decide you want to try some plant cannabinoids, they might be valuable. The system is already there for them to be received.
And so how are they received? Well, actually, before we get there, let's go a little deeper into what specifically the 2-AG and the anandamide are doing in the body. Like, what
Yeah.
is, you mentioned anti-inflammatory, but what sort of is the list of these physiological roles? I'm under the impression that it's not just inflammation and pain, but also the body's sort of resilience, response to stress, the ability to kind of turn off the stress response, things of that nature.
I think it's just another great example of systems in our bodies that are designed to restore homeostasis and help us stay calm in the setting of stress. They really they basically work at the point where nerves talk to other nerves, like other cells that are other drugs that impact neurotransmission. These formulations impact neurotransmission. So, for example, when you take an antidepressant, you're trying to increase the amount of serotonin or norepinephrine or dopamine that lingers in that neurotransmitter point where two nerves are talking to each other, and that will elevate your mood. The cannabinoids through the CB receptors function in a lot the same way, but they also have functions that are similar to gabapentin in the peripheral nervous system that help to reduce nerve-based pain. They behave like a lot of other pain medications, and in fact, even the opioids that operate through the mu receptors, their functionality is fairly similar to the way that cannabinoids function. So they work in the central nervous system, in the brain, and in the spinal cord to help temper anxiety responses or pain responses. Because sometimes when pain goes up and down the spine, or when it hits the brain, the cortex of the brain, it'll expand and generate and sort of enlarge itself along those pathways. So the endocannabinoid contribution is that it reduces that ability of the pain to sort of amp itself up as you're dealing with chronic pain. But
Gotcha.
it's also great to have these products available for when you're dealing with a lot of anxiety. It works to help to stabilize all of the stress and anxiety responses so that you have a more limited anxiety response rather than more of a generalized response.
Gotcha. So there's a lot to unpack there. Let's talk, I guess, you could maybe treat this separately or all as one, but specifically between anandamide and 2-AG, what are the differences in terms of how they are affecting our physiology? And I guess also part of that question is CB1 versus CB2. Sort of what roles the CB1 receptors versus CB2 receptors are playing. And then,
Yeah.
and this is the part that could either be treated all under this umbrella or as a separate question after. Uh, where does CBD fit into this system, these different mechanisms?
Right, right. Well, the CB1 receptors, with their primary location in the central nervous system, work on things that, are managed within the central nervous system, the anti-inflammatory effects, the anti-anxiety effects on CB1 receptors. But both receptors are stimulated by any of the endocannabinoids. It's not that CBD works here and THC works here and CBN works here. All of the different receptors are responsive, and similarly, having similar responses to 5-AG and anandamide, the endocannabinoids that your body is creating. And these, work in the central nervous system to help avoid that amping up, and then, but also work similarly on the tissues in the body and the organs in the body that are under inflammation or under stress to help to temper that stress response. So I don't think that there's a significant difference between 5-AG and anandamide in terms of one or the other functioning differently in the periphery, out in the
Uh,
body.
did you say
It,
5-AG or 2-AG?
I'm sorry, 2 AG and
Okay.
anandamide, yes.
I was like,
I'm
I don't think I know of a 5 AG.
No, I don't know of a 5 AG either. Maybe we can make it up today.
Yeah. So there are some people listening who might have heard what you just said there, kind of like, we don't necessarily know if there's a big difference between the effects. Maybe they interpreted that as THC and CBD are acting the same way. Uh,
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
so,
I meant
so
to
no,
say
no, don't apologize. So I want you to clarify, because there's a lot of people out there who hear CBD comes from cannabis plants,
yes.
and then they immediately go, "Oh, it's marijuana. This is a drug to get people high. This is going to cause me to fail drug tests. This is a drug that's harmful. I need to avoid drugs and marijuana." Okay, so
It's so important to get that clear right away
yeah.
because CBD is definitely a distillation, from the same basic plant, but it doesn't have the psychotropic effects of THC. The stuff that gets you high, that gives you that dizzy, lightheaded, dissociated feeling, is all from the THC. So when you're using a CBD product, you're not going to get any of that experience. It's just the workhorse portion of all of those CBD molecules. So you get all the benefits of using a full spectrum in a lot of cases, and then you don't have to deal with all of the effects of the THC on those effects that many people just don't like.
Yeah.
So I was referring to the 2 AG, not the 5 AG. The 2 AG and the anandamide is not having really significantly different effects. But
Gotcha.
person to person, there's a significant difference in the amount of those products in the body, and also in CB1 and CB2 receptors and the receptor concentrations. So, oftentimes when I talk to a patient who says this didn't work for me, we have to go back and think about why that didn't work, what was going wrong with the formulation. Maybe we chose the wrong formulation, or maybe they didn't take enough. But sometimes it's just because there's genetically a different ability to respond to cannabinoid formulations overall.
Hmm.
So it's important to just take time to learn about what you're doing here, and like you're doing today, and then give yourself plenty of time to change your serving size up or down, and see what works best for you.
Gotcha. Now, did I misunderstand something that you said a little bit ago? As far as, I think you said something to the effect of, it's not as if these compounds only affect like just CB1 receptors or just CB2 receptors. I think you were referring to CBD and THC when you were saying that. Is that correct? Or
Yes, yeah, that's correct. Whenever you're using either the endocannabinoids that your body produces itself, the 2 AG and anandamide, or the products that you might be taking from a plant, or the products that are synthetic. Some drug companies have some synthetic products that are 100% man-made. All of those products affect all of the receptors. There's some early discussion about some receptors being impacted differently, but we really don't have any clear data on that yet.
well,
But we're getting
they have to be impacted differently if THC gets you high in that way that you described, that sort of euphoric, lightheaded state, whereas CBD doesn't do that. Doesn't that necessarily mean that they're interacting
no.
with the receptors in different ways, or what's going on there?
That's a very good point. It could be that they are reacting with the receptors in a different way and creating a different outcome. I hadn't really, I guess I meant to say, like, I think that the THC and the CBD both impact receptors in the central nervous system and all over the body. So the way that they interact with the receptor is definitely different, but both of those cannabinoids cross the blood-brain barrier and get into the central nervous system, and both of them affect all of the receptors through the body.
Yeah.
So you can, use a THC product, but a lot of times, if you don't like that feeling or if you don't want to get that exposure, you can use a CBD product and get a pretty good benefit from just using the CBD exclusively, and not having to ever add the THC.
Gotcha. Now, I have to ask, both my wife and I have experimented with higher doses, quite high doses of CBD. And
Mhm.
at a very high dose of it, she and I have both felt some sort of, definitely some I don't know, psychoactive effect. It's definitely way different than just plain marijuana, but
Yes.
there was some sort of, I don't know. I don't even know how to describe what the feeling is, but some kind of psychoactive effect.
You know, it's exactly as you say. That's exactly true. And I think that you're not the only person who said that. To say that CBD is entirely not psychoactive doesn't actually tell the whole story, right? Because we know that CBD is having a central nervous system effect because it relieves anxiety and helps some people with their depression. It works in both of those cases, in many cases. So we know that it has an effect on mood, but the psychoactive effect, the experience of getting high, is really reserved to the THC. But at higher doses, people do experience, excuse me, I should say serving sizes. The FDA doesn't want us to say doses. So at higher serving sizes on the CBD, you are going to have some of those experiences where you feel deeply calm. But I still don't think that you're getting the psychoactive, dissociative, dizzy effects that you see with
Gotcha.
using THC. But definitely, you're going to see some changes in the way that you are perceiving things and the way that you're interacting.
Gotcha. Now, you mentioned there's some, I guess, debate or still much research to be done to sort of identify, I guess, the specific unique patterns of activation in THC versus CBD and sort of why they're affecting us in different ways. But in terms of sort of the relevant physiological benefits or health
Mhm.
benefits of consuming these, so things like and maybe I should just ask you what the list is, but I'm thinking like obviously combating chronic pain and chronic inflammatory conditions, neurodegenerative conditions or neuroprotection. Um, there's some research on clinical endocannabinoid deficiency as it relates to chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, and migraines and chronic pain and some other things. Um, what are the and cancer also, that's the other one I wanted to mention. What are the differences, if any, as far as um, the relevance or usefulness of CBD versus THC for those different kinds of symptoms and health conditions?
Well, you know, Ari, I really thought when I first started to work more intensely in this, I mean, I've been writing cannabis cards for members of my practice for 15 years and just listening to their stories, but not necessarily acting on it until just a few years ago when I experienced, two deaths, two hospice cases right on top of each other, one with and one without cannabinoids, and saw such a stark contrast that I felt like I had to learn more about this and see if there was something that people needed to know. I mean, after starting to do research, I am amazed at the depth and breadth of the research for so many things. I mean, I've shot now 100 different videos, and I have to, shoot shortly after this bipolar disease and also a bunch of videos surrounding heart disease and metabolic syndromes. So there's a lot of data on helping to manage addiction, on multiple sclerosis and other muscle spasms and nerve-based pain. There's data on managing chronic low back pain and fibromyalgia. There's the amazing, I mean, absolutely jaw-dropping data, I think, on seizure disorder. We've got, 6 different good studies, 5 excellent studies of over 500 children who were still sick as they could be on maximum medical management with their seizures. And the addition of CBD cut those seizures in half in almost all cases. Kids that were so disabled that the majority of the surveys that were getting filled out by a caretaker. So a really remarkable improvement for some pretty significant conditions.
Yeah.
So all of that is exciting too. But the cancer research, I would have to say, out of this incredibly broad list, and there's a lot of research also, I should say, around skin and just maintenance of really healthy, youthful skin with high functioning sebaceous glands, or people that have chronic inflammation on their skin getting such nice results in some cases. But I was circling back to the cancer data. Almost all of the cancer data that we have on cancer fighting with cannabinoids is all petri dish test tube data. We really do need better research. But the other side of the coin is that the petri dish and test tube data is pretty good data. So, and you're certainly not going to hurt yourself in the setting.
Meaning impressive data as far as the effect size of the CBD and the THC and their anti-cancer potential.
Yeah, there's a number of different ways they work. They work within the cell with the MK-AP pathway, the MPK pathway, the pathway that does energy control and management and helps the cell move into like a cell death plan rather than being immortal like most cancer cells are. So working through that pathway is a very important pathway to help guide cancer cells toward a more normal life and death rather than the weird immortality thing that cancer cells get into. And in the same way, it appears to work with the ceramides within the cell that also help to program cell death in a more appropriate way. But another really exciting way is through these PG pumps, these pumps that live on the surface of the cell and work to pump out toxins like chemotherapy. So when people are sick with cancer and they get a second or third round of chemo and it quits working, a lot of that we think is because of these pumps on the surface of the cells that get all of those toxins out as fast as they come in, which in most cases is really good. But if you're trying to kill cancer cells, we want to keep those toxins in the cell as long as we can. But the great news about cannabinoid formulations is that they appear to help those pumps to work slower so that in the setting of cancer, they can appear to boost some forms of chemotherapy. But the cancer data is also amazing around, the heart disease associated with certain chemotherapies. You can get illness and damage to your heart. You can also get a lot of damage to your nervous system and deal with chronic pain and numbness in your fingers and in your feet after you've survived cancer. You can get ringing in your ears from damage to your auditory nerve. And all of those different problems appear to be at least partially alleviated by using cannabinoid formulations during the time of your chemotherapy. Again, these are small studies. They're not big multi-center trials, but the people who are doing these studies are very excited about those outcomes.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
excited.
I appreciate you explaining kind of the caveats to interpreting the literature there. Are there any other benefits to CBD that you haven't mentioned thus far?
Oh, I think in that there's also some research around Parkinson's and tremor and movement disorders that is sort of give or take. Some studies show results that are very impressive with Parkinson's. I think the best studies really don't show a significant improvement in the actual tremor, but people who have Parkinson's have a very significant sleep disorder where they have these frightening nightmares and they'll kick or punch in their sleep because they think that they're in a fight, oftentimes at work or with an animal. I mean, very scary dreams. And then they've oftentimes hurt their bed partners. These episodes occur like once a week in the people who experience them. And taking the CBD almost completely eliminates them for
Wow.
people who are dealing with that. But it
That's got to be
also
interpreted as a hugely positive sign.
for the patient and for their bed partner.
Right.
And
Yeah.
the
So
other,
even if it's not, altering the output of dopamine from the substantia nigra in the brain, it's affecting something in the brain that's changing something in the direction of less negative emotional states and dream states.
yeah, the dream states and the insomnia, the control of nightmares has been very well studied in one Canadian trial with a group of PTSD sufferers that were sleeping only 5 hours a night and were having nightmares 5 nights a week. Very, very difficult sleep patterns, even with all we could do with medical management. And they were able to improve the sleep by 2 hours per night with a cannabinoid formulation, and then also reduce the nightmares to one a week, down
Wow.
from five a week.
That's
So you
phenomenal.
can imagine that, I mean, with everything that you know about sleep, Ari, oh my word, you know what a major difference that made for those people. That was
Yeah,
life
most
changing.
Yeah, I mean, just to give them 2 hours more sleep and higher quality sleep. I mean, as far as building that out to their overall, you know, health trajectory and disease trajectory over the next several decades of their life, that's massively life changing for sure.
Yes, I'm so excited about the sleep and nightmare issues. And I talk to people about those issues every single day, all day long. Everybody that is dealing with other issues, the sleep and the anxiety or depression overlie all of that. So, in some cases, I'm not able to find great data on how CBD or cannabis is working in a particular situation with a larger trial, and sometimes not even a small trial. But you can get some data surrounding the anxiety and insomnia that plagues so many people that are dealing with chronic disease.
Yeah.
One situation that I was so surprised and so excited to read about was about tics and Tourette's. There's only 4 case reports that are published from a German psychiatrist, 2 separate case reports of 2 case reports each. So it's actually not just one guy doing all the publication, but they had patients with tics and Tourette's that were very sick, adolescents and young adults who were getting so sick with the tics, especially the vocal tics, that they couldn't really talk to people. And one just couldn't even go to school anymore. And they started them on, of course, every possible Western management, and then eventually got to a cannabinoid formulation. And they went back to school, both of them. And then,
Wow.
very interestingly, got sick again. Ended up having to leave school. Everything fell apart. And it turned out they had stopped using their cannabinoid formulation.
Wow.
When they got back on it, everything got back to normal again.
Hmm.
I videoed those videos. I shot those videos, and then was meeting an old high school friend for dinner, and she said, "Do you mind if I bring my daughter with us to dinner?" And I said, "Absolutely not. That would be great." And then, sure enough, unbelievably, she was loaded with tics, and all of a sudden, I had somebody who really needed this information. So I shared it with them, and some months have passed because that kid is really, really brilliant that didn't want to impact their scores by changing anything, but did work over the summer, and what a remarkable outcome with their conditions. Very exciting. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm excited to share even those smaller case reports and give people at least an opportunity to know what's out there for whatever they're dealing with.
Yeah. Very interesting. Now, you said cannabinoid formulation. Is that THC and CBD some kind of mix of the two in this case?
Yeah, most of the time when I'm talking about all of these things, I talk about cannabinoid formulations, and I can refer to studies that are just purely CBD. We can stay there. A lot of studies are CBD with THC, and unfortunately, not necessarily the same formulation for everybody who's in the study at the same serving size.
Hmm.
So, people are titrating to where it's working for them. And so one person might be taking quite a bit more or quite a bit less. But then on top of that, they might be taking an entirely different formulation or an entirely different mode of administration. They may be somebody might be taking a gummy bear and another person's using a whole flower in a vape. So so to some degree here, we're still in the infancy of learning, of getting everything, standardized so that we can give you a recommendation.
Yeah. Now, I want to go back to the sleep thing for a minute. I know there's some studies that have shown that CBD can improve deep sleep.
Mhm.
Do you have any comments on that? I know that there's also some, if I remember correctly, some of those studies use quite a high dosage, like in the neighborhood of I want to say 70 or 100 milligrams, um, which is considerably higher than the serving size of most CBD products. Do you have any thoughts on optimal dosing for sleep, and can you speak to the studies that have examined the effects of CBD on sleep?
We have quite a bit of data around sleep. We have that amazing Canadian study, but then we also have some companies that are tracking what people are taking and then giving them an opportunity to report on how well it worked. So they can sort of drive you to a particular strain or a particular formulation that is working for most people. And some of these companies are collecting, hundreds of thousands they call of serving sizes of various different products, and they can give us quite a bit of clarity on what's working and what's not. So you're absolutely right. Some people are getting excellent results with higher concentrations of CBD for sleep, but I've had patients taking a fairly small concentration and getting an excellent result on a problem that they really couldn't get under control before that with anything that their doctor was giving them. So it's really exciting to see these start to take shape. I can't really tell you what serving size is going to be ideal, and I think in a lot of cases you might be coming in at quite a bit lower than 70 to 100. I mean, in my experience working with patients, it's quite a bit lower in most cases. The best thing to do is just start at a lower serving size, and then set a
Something like 15 milligrams.
whatever you have, get a decent concentration in a container, no less than 1,000 milligrams in a container, and then start with a half a dropper full, and then see how that works for you. If that's not working, then go ahead and increase. That probably is going to give you your best opportunity to just see how it's working in your system and not get too much at first, or
What if somebody's taking it in pills? How much does half a dropper full equate to in pills? And
I would consider not taking it in pills until you
okay,
know exactly how much tincture works. Because if you can hold the tincture in your mouth, you can get virtually instantaneous results. You can get results in 8 or 9 minutes. And if it doesn't work, you can take a little more at 20 or 30 minutes and then see if that works. You can monitor or modify your serving size much more readily. If you take a pill or a benign looking little gummy bear, it's going to give you an onset of action 60 to 90 minutes later. So at that point, did it work or did it not? More often than not, when people start with an edible, they'll say that it didn't work for them. So if you're just starting out, I wouldn't start out with an edible. I would start out with a tincture or some sort of vapor flower that is available to you too.
gotcha. You said some stuff there that I want to come back to as far as holding it in your mouth, instantaneous effects versus swallowing. Very important. And I've actually never heard someone talk specifically about that. Maybe that's just my own ignorance, or I just haven't stumbled across other people talking about that. But I want to come back to that.
Okay.
First, is is there any literature around, so we talked about sleep. There's I think a really nice potential there to help people with sleep problems. But is there any other areas related to common complaints that people listening to this podcast might have? So people, very common for them to have fatigue, energy problems, and sleep problems, brain related symptoms like brain fog, depression, anxiety, um, chronic pain. So do you have any thoughts on that kind of constellation of factors there?
Oh, I think it's a good idea to give the formulations a try in those settings. I mean, in different ways that chronic pain presents itself. Chronic pain to some degree has a life of its own. When you're dealing with chronic pain, you've got all of the pathways that are ascending in the spinal cord. You've got the cortical, acceleration of the pain on the surface of the brain, and then the pain can ramp up again on the descending pathways in the spinal cord as it goes back out. And so in that way, like interstitial cystitis, fibromyalgia, low back pain, headaches, irritable bowel syndrome would all seem to be different, but they're all actually very similar in that they have this chronic pain generator that throws off all of your neurotransmitters. So using a product that works at those neurotransmitter junction, and its intent is to stabilize and improve your responses with serotonin and norepinephrine and neurontin and GABA, and so in a similar way that Neurontin does. These products all work in those areas to help to calm and restore balance. So the data on chronic pain is very interesting and very reassuring. There's some Israeli work on the work in Israel is very, very good and right at the front line of all the new research. But there's an Israeli study that was published surrounding fibromyalgia women, about 80 of them, and about half of them on opioids when they first presented to start the trial with cannabinoids. And the women were all on one or two medications. They'd been maxed out. They were getting no relief, and they started on a THC CBD for cannabinoid formulation, and all of them stopped their opioids,
Wow.
and half of them stopped all of their other medications and went
Wow.
exclusively with their new formulation. Some very
Well,
fascinating.
there's the no sales pitch for CBD necessary. I mean, just cite that one study, and it's like, damn, that's impressive.
Yeah, and they have other studies of patients who are not a fibromyalgia, but different pain generators. One study that was done on patients with low back pain, again, with a shocking amount of people who were using opioids, a lot of other problems around chronic pain management, opioids and all kinds of other conditions. We use antidepressants at high doses. We also use antipsychotics sometimes because that will help to further release norepinephrine and dopamine. A lot of these in this other trial were effectively weaned off the patients along with their opioids, just with the use of the cannabinoid formulation. So what a lot of the really exciting research is now is trying to figure out what's the big player. Are any of these littler, lesser known cannabinoids really the star of the show? If we can find out that CBN, for example, is like remarkable for sleep, or that CBG or CBC is amazing for gut inflammation, they can distill that off too, or synthesize that molecule, and then we'll have some other products that are going to be super, super good in very specific conditions. So
Hmm.
that's where all of the really interesting work right now is being done not only in Israel, all over the world.
Hmm. Um, I've seen some studies, I think more recent studies, that have discovered some cannabinoid receptors on mitochondria. Are you familiar with any effects of CBD and other cannabinoids on mitochondria, and how that could maybe relate to people dealing with chronic fatigue?
Well, I'm very excited about the this molecular level, how the CBD or other cannabinoids are impacting people at this mitochondrial level and affecting metabolism. It's interesting that even though THC is affiliated with the munchies, and everybody thinks that smoking cannabinoid formulations will lead to these massive outbursts of appetite and people eating Doritos and cookie dough and crazy food. It turns out that if people use cannabinoid formulations over their lifetime, they actually stay healthier. They have better HDL to LDL ratios, they have lower triglyceride levels, less insulin resistance, better waist to hip ratios. They keep a waist into their adulthood better. And the only reason that, at least what we've been able to identify so far, is that people stay slim. All of these wonderful impacts on the metabolism are a result of being able to keep your body weight really low when you're regularly using cannabinoids.
Hmm.
And then these people stay at a high school weight or just slightly above a high school weight, and that's like the healthiest weight to live your whole life.
Hmm.
There's probably a million reasons why that's happening. One of them is the change in the metabolism at the mitochondrial level, I believe. And some of it might be that people are getting dopamine and feel good hormones without having to drink a lot of high calorie alcohol or eat high calorie desserts and other things that also stimulate those receptors in a similar way. So people just don't have to eat as much. In large part, if you're using a high CBD product or less THC, it's not as much of an appetite stimulator as you would think.
Hmm.
If you want to cut the nausea of an end-stage cancer patient or manage their appetite, you really have to go very high on the THC. And then that helps to sort of dissociate from all of those central nervous system, responses, the nausea and appetite. But a person who's just using cannabinoid formulations on a regular basis over the course of their lifetime can expect to be have a healthier metabolism and healthier markers of a good metabolism too. I
Hmm.
think that's just fascinating.
Yeah. I almost interrupted you there because I want to interject that a lot of people, kind of going back to what we talked about at the beginning of this, a lot of people have this very, very negative stigma of marijuana use. I'm not a marijuana user myself, but I do use CBD. I have used marijuana probably, I don't know, 25 times in my life, something like that. Um, it's a nice experience, but I use CBD regularly. Anyway, a lot of people have this very negative, association with marijuana. It's a drug. It causes, brain damage and messes you up, messes up your health. And I just want to contrast that with what you were just saying, that you're basically pointing to research suggesting that long-term use of these compounds is actually associated with better health outcomes. Is that, first of all, is that accurate, and are there any nuances there? And maybe also, is smoking versus ingesting oral,
Yeah.
oils and things like
Oh,
that, is that a factor in terms of health outcomes and long-term health effects?
I mean, there probably is quite a caveat there, and that I cover this in my 1 hour long lecture, "Stopping the Top Killers," like how cannabinoid formulations help to reduce your risks for accidents and heart disease and cancer and stroke and bacterial infections, the top 5 things that kill people. And there's the most controversial one, and the number one thing is the reduction in heart disease, and all still very theoretical at this point. But people, will see all of these excellent biochemical markers toward a healthier metabolism. There are case reports scattered throughout the literature of a person who smoked cannabinoid formulations and then developed an elevated heart rate or an anxiety response that landed them in the ER, or worse, people who had a predisposition to heart disease and then smoked and had chest pain and went on to have heart attacks. So there are also reports of young people who have used drugs of all kinds, cocaine and meth and cannabinoids, who have experienced negative cardiac consequences.
Mhm.
So the literature is a bit divided on that.
What
There's
about the smoking itself, as far as the smoke byproducts? Are
Oh,
they
I think
are
it's
they a concern for lung health?
Well, there is actually some research being done right now on adding CBD to tobacco to try to reduce the amount of inflammation that someone gets from smoking
Oh, wow.
tobacco.
That's interesting.
So, yeah, yeah, we a lot of our data that we have on what happens to your lungs is based on smoking, and not really smoking tobacco versus smoking cannabinoid formulations. And if you think about it, a tobacco smoker is smoking 400 inhalations a day if you're smoking a pack a day, and a person who is using cannabinoids might inhale 8 times a day.
Mhm.
you know so I mean, at a heavy use. So it really is a different exposure to your lungs. But
Yeah.
different formulations, as we've obviously seen from vaping, different formulations are going to have different impacts on your insides. And probably between smoking and vaping, you might be better off using one of the electronic vapes that uses whole flower, not the kind that has a liquid where the product is, suspended in propylene glycol or vegetable glycerin, but where you can actually crush up a whole flower and put it inside your vape, and that will help so that it doesn't burn the flower and release all of the carcinogens. It's more of a superheating,
Mhm.
which has a considerably less concentration of carcinogens and other damaging things.
Gotcha. So I want to um, get into the practical side of some CBD recommendations, and I have some questions for you there. Um, I want to just quickly recap some of kind of like list off some of the key benefits we've discussed so far. So we've mentioned sleep, the nightmares, as well as I believe also increasing um, deep sleep as well, and overall sleep time, decreasing inflammation, combating chronic pain, potentially combating this endocannabinoid deficiency that is linked with chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, migraines, chronic pain, and so on. Combating chronic inflammation, I assume maybe it could have some positive effects in various chronic inflammatory and autoimmune conditions. What else? What am I missing?
Boy, everything that you're saying is right on track. I mean, in terms of managing inflammation, you've got its ability to help in the central nervous system and also in the periphery. And so many conditions arise from inflammation. And in terms of having your immune response have a different or maybe better immune response to an inflammatory episode is also in its infancy of being evaluated. But really promising results on helping to sort of temper the inflammatory response and change, how much inflammation the body creates in some cases where it might be over responding. Like
Hmm.
when you get the flu, for example, and you get a terrible headache and horrible body aches, there's some early rat data that pre-dosing people or giving CBD prior to getting the exposure to the flu actually reduces the significance of all of that response. It tempers the response to the virus. So
Interesting.
you and your neighbor may get the flu, but your neighbor without the cannabinoids in place may get quite a bit sicker while you're still able to go back and forth to work. So
Interesting.
I do believe that, in it, that there's an overlay of this system for a reason. And if we were before the prohibition of the 1920s, we'd be getting cannabinoids in our system whether we wanted to or not. I mean,
Mhm.
it's a weed. It grows in the ditch. It's a very simple weed to grow.
Mhm.
So, I mean, and nothing to say about the growers because I say that, but I can't keep a cactus alive in my so, I mean, all blessings to those amazing farmers that are feeding me, because otherwise I'd
It's really
starve.
easy to grow, but for other people, not me.
But you would have it would pollinate itself 6 times a year
Mhm.
unless it was in my garden, and you'd get all of that fantastic pollen in your that you'd breathe into your lungs. You would get that exposure, and the animals, presuming you're eating any animals or drinking any milk or eating eggs, the chicken would peck away at the herbs, right? They're herbivores. The cows would munch on the herbs, and it would incorporate into their body just like it does in ours. So you would always be getting this little exposure. And this is one of those prohibitions or one of those limitations that our society and our current modern culture has just unfortunately really done us harm in doing,
Mhm.
in my opinion. We have something that is designed to regulate and restore and balance, and access to it is being thwarted by, unfortunately, some laws that are slower to change than I'd hope.
Yeah.
But the good news is CBD is legal in all 50 states, and you can get it anywhere, and then give those products a try without any risk to anybody ever coming and putting you in danger. You
Yeah.
know,
I,
yeah.
I know we're at the end of our allotted window, but do you have like 5 more minutes? I just have a few more questions, or do you have to run right now?
More minutes.
Yeah, you're good? Okay.
Yeah.
So one question I have, I want to get into like very practical recommendations on products and some of the aspects of that. But first, as far as chronic use of these products, is there any concern with disrupting the natural regulation of our endocannabinoid system? Like if you use, um, as an example, like for example, steroid users, obviously, if you
Mhm.
inject testosterone, then you interfere with your body's own production of testosterone.
Yes.
You have, and there's lots of other examples of like hormonal negative feedback loops like that. But is there any effect like that where the more you use these external and cannabinoids, the more that your internal endocannabinoid system is disrupted?
There's not a lot of discussion in the literature about a buildup of tolerance when people are using the products over time. A lot of times you can get to a good dose and stay at that dose for a surprisingly long time without a lot of trouble. So the buildup of tolerance is not as much of a problem as I think it could be. There's certainly you upregulate your CB receptors or downregulate your CB receptors based on availability. So there is your body managing that and probably suppressing the development of 2-AG and anandamide when you're giving a lot of cannabinoids from cannabinoids from plants that you might
Yeah.
be supplementing with your diet.
Yeah.
So
Even, even,
there are
even,
those changes that can happen.
one example I talk about often in my work is with caffeine and how chronic use of caffeine can cause neurotransmitter adaptation. So, um, caffeine works on the adenosine neurotransmitter system by so adenosine is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. It's normally like calming to the brain and relaxing, and basically caffeine goes in and it locks into that same adenosine receptor, but doesn't act like adenosine. It just blocks adenosine from getting in. So by blocking this inhibitory neurotransmitter, you create a stimulant energizing effect. And we know from lots and lots of good research over many decades that that works in the short term, and it does absolutely give you a stimulant energizing effect. But with chronic use of caffeine, the body basically ramps up levels of adenosine and the amount of adenosine receptors so that your baseline levels of energy and your mood and sort of wakefulness, alertness, all drop. And so that's why people then become dependent on caffeine. And so they wake up groggy and then they need their coffee in order to get their brain going.
We
Um,
said that, all during medical school. I mean, you start out thinking I'm going to be able to do this, and the whole situation is overwhelming. And then by Christmas time in your first year, you're a caffeine addict, but you can't, but it hasn't really solved the problem. It solved the problem way back in November, but
right.
by December, yeah, there were a couple of people, very smart, intuitive people in our medical school that wouldn't touch caffeine because they said at some point all you're going to be doing is peeing more. It's not going to provide you any extra benefit, except
Yeah.
now you have a caffeine problem.
Yeah, now you're dependent on the caffeine to function normally, and the research is quite clear that that happens in the long term. It works very effective. Like if you only used it during finals week and nothing else, it would be great. But when you use it every day, it doesn't actually do what people think it's doing, and it's quite insidious because the subjective perception of it is that it is helping you, and
Yes.
in fact, all it's really done is lowered your baseline levels of energy and wakefulness and brain function such that you're dependent on it to function normally. But anyway, I guess I'm asking is there any indication that a similar type of effect could happen with THC or CBD use?
I am not seeing that signal in the literature, no. I'm
Okay.
not seeing that. It could be happening if you significantly downregulate the receptors, or the body's concentrations of 5-AG and anandamide aren't able to be supported, because you're using a lot of plants. But I am not seeing that signal in the literature, Ari. There is some very aggressive work being done around the cytochrome systems in the liver, and how these cannabinoids are metabolizing in the setting of the P450 systems in the liver. Because we all know about grapefruit, that if you get into grapefruit, right, it changes your statin, your lipid lowering level medications, because it sort of plugs up that particular cytochrome system in the liver. So it's interesting with endocannabinoids, with phytocannabinoids, with cannabinoids. They break down through the same pathway as opioids in the liver.
Mm,
And so, initially people were arguing, well, it's a liver effect. You don't have to take as much opioids because it plugs up the system and the opioids don't break down.
mm-hmm.
But that doesn't turn out to be true. It appears that they use the same system for breakdown, but there's, no evidence that one or another thing is being held back where the other thing is being metabolized. Everything appears to be metabolizing smoothly and sort of at the same time. There's one small trial that suggests that cannabinoids metabolize first, but even so, even if that were true, it's not like effect where it's throwing other drugs off of their metabolism by, hours or days. It's, just by moments, really. So at this point, we feel pretty confident that, a lot of the changes that are made in other pain, medicines, when you add the cannabinoids, are because, they're effective directly at that neurotransmitter junction in helping nerves talk to other nerves in a healthier way and not, continue on that chronic pain pathway.
Gotcha.
So,
Um,
yeah, so that's a very good question, but I don't see any tolerance building up. There's no evidence that people have to go higher and higher and higher.
Gotcha. Very interesting. So, on a practical note, there are some companies now offering. There's a variety of different products. Some CBD isolates, some CBD, like sort of mixed cannabinoids, like CBD plus some other stuff. There's some people offering. Don't know the correct term, but I think it's like decarboxylated versus non-decarboxylated, like non-heat treated, sort of raw,
Mhm.
unheat treated. Um, and I think it's like CBG and CBN. And then when it's heat treated, it turns into CBD. Please correct me. I'm sure I'm getting some aspect of that wrong. But what is your perception of the relevance of like the non-heat treated versions of these versus the sort of the CBD and the THC?
Well, there's some thought that the heat treatment will carboxylate and allow these products to be more effective. So a lot of times passing through heat is not a bad idea for these products. So a heat treatment is a good idea, but probably more important. So I think the more important thing to think about with your formulations is just what kind of a person you are, what is important to you, and what you're trying to achieve and what your limitations are. A pure CBD isolate should have zero THC, and if you're being drug tested at work, you need to talk to the people that are doing those drug tests, because some of them want to limit your CBD exposure also. But if you're using a full spectrum or broad spectrum CBD oil, it's going to have the CBD, but it'll also have CBG and CBN and CBC and some small amount of THC potentially. And that can pop a drug test if you're taking higher concentrations. But also CBG it is very interesting in that that will break down into a little bit of THC. So in a full spectrum product, if you have to 100% avoid THC, you could run into some problems. But if you're not getting tested, if a very tiny amount of THC is not a problem, or if the CBG is not a problem, you do get this whole plant experience, more of like an essential oil experience when you're using a full spectrum or broad spectrum CBD supplement. If you're using just the CBD isolate, if you're a person who's like, I want to know if CBD works for me. I don't want to know if CBN or CBG or whatever other phytonutrient. I just want to know about CBD. Then get a CBD tincture that's made from a CBD isolate. And I would expect from any company you work for in this industry, and there's a lot of good ones. I think the majority of them are excellent, but I would expect total transparency so that you can flip your jar over or your box and be able to scan a QR code or something like that and be able to see the third party testing on that particular batch. So you can see
As
how
far
much.
as purity and how much THC is in there.
I mean, I care about CBD and THC concentrations 100%, but I also want to know if there's herbicides or pesticides.
Uh-huh.
That matters to me. It doesn't matter to everybody, but it matters to me. And so you can do third-party testing that covers just THC and CBD if that's all you want to know about. But a lot of good companies are also looking at third-party testing for, the pesticides and herbicides. And then also, we're way over time, but also the terpenes, which is another whole discussion. But the terpenes are sort of what drives the car here, where the CBD starts the engine, but the terpenes will help to promote calm or help to promote a higher level of energy and creativity. They're like the essential oils of the cannabis community.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of different CBD products out there with different mechanisms just based on those formulation changes.
Yeah,
So it's
my
really helpful
my
with
my
Mitochondria.
personal experience is I've tried some CBD isolates and I've tried some, mixed cannabinoid CBD plus sort of the others, and I know there's
Yeah,
the entourage effect which you've alluded to here.
exactly.
Um, and my experience is I can't identify any noticeable effect from the CBD isolates where I can from the others, the mixed stuff. Um,
Well, that supports my view of everything. As much as you can, you should derive everything you can from whole products, whole foods, whole bud. And if you can't get that, then taking some vitamin C in lieu of eating an apple is okay every now and then. But and you might need to supplement those things all the time based on how your food is being sourced or just your lifestyle. But if you can get a whole plant, I think that is a much more valuable form of nutrition than a distillation
yeah.
in so many cases.
Yeah. There was a liposomal formula that you gave me a sample of when we met in person 4 or 5 months ago, whenever it was. And that one definitely has noticeable effects, as well as one I've tried with mixed cannabinoids from Bluebird Botanicals. My last question to you is to go back to what you mentioned before about holding it in your mouth. Is it absorbed through the mouth? And my
Hmm.
personal experience is, and I'm totally uncertain as to whether this is placebo effect or it's a real effect, is if I put it in my mouth and hold it there, that I get sort of like an instant calming effect that occurs. I don't know if it's a reaction from
Well,
the taste or if it's actually absorption of the compounds or if it's just placebo. But you mentioned this idea of
yeah,
holding it in your mouth, so I'm curious
right.
what you're referring to there.
The compound should absorb very readily through the membranes in the mouth, under the tongue, or through the cheeks, especially. And of course, the brain is very close to that, so it doesn't take long for that blood to flow from one area to the other. So it really helps you to get a good idea of how quickly you're getting, or what kind of a result you're seeing, just because the onset is so much more rapid when you hold a tincture in your mouth, or if you inhale, you get so much blood moving through your lungs that gives you very quick effects, oftentimes effects in as little as 8 or 9 minutes, but it can be shorter, and maximum effects coming on in 20 or 30 minutes. So most dosing calculators are suggesting that you do that you take a serving size and then set an alarm for 30 minutes or 40 minutes out. You're going to be at maximum effect if you use it inhaled or by holding it in your mouth and absorbing it across the buccal membranes.
Mhm.
Then you can see if it's going to work at 40 minutes and write that information down. If you do that 14 or 20 times, you'll know exactly what works for you.
Excellent. Dr. Clifton, this has been a blast. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I want to mention to everybody listening again that Dr. Clifton has a whole CBD summit coming up. I'm one of the speakers on it, talking mainly about energy, and then it's more of a conversation, I want to say, where like there's me talking about some things related to energy and circadian rhythm and things like that, and then Dr. Clifton's bringing in a lot of the connections with the endocannabinoid system and the CBD and things of that nature. I strongly recommend you listen in. There's going to be a ton of amazing information, just like you got in this podcast episode. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Again, you can opt in for that CBD summit at theenergyblueprint.com/CBD, theenergyblueprint.com/CBD. So, Dr. Clifton, thank you again so much. Thank you for going overtime 15 minutes here. I really appreciate it. Sorry if you're late for your next meeting with a patient, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, Ari. Thank you for the honor of talking to your community. It's just been a wonderful day.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Take care. Hey there, this is Ari again. One more quick thing before you go. Just make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Energy Blueprint, and also make sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform, whether that's iTunes or Stitcher or anything else. I hope you guys enjoyed this interview, and I will see you again next week.